other thing that I have to tell you about is that I have been summoned to federal jury duty. Yeah. So sometime between now and the end of February, I expect to be called to go and testify against, not testify, but to sit in judgment against some federal criminal or someone accused of a federal crime. I don't know enough to know if it's federal. That's all I know. It's federal. I got to go to Salt Lake for this. So I do not know when or even really if I'm going to be called, but it'll be sometime before the end of February. If that happens, I guess I'm just going to post the videos from last semester or something, but you want me to try to find a substitute to come in and teach this not nearly as well as I do? Or you just want to watch the videos? I'll make the videos available. Okay, so hopefully if I'm gone, it won't be long. Hopefully I won't be gone at all, but truth is I'm kind of looking forward to it. I don't know, it seems like a neat thing to be on a jury. Okay, and maybe you ever been on a jury? Anyone? No one? I was gonna look for some advice. Okay, so I think that's good for today. Let's go ahead and get started. So, oh no, we're gonna do attendance. It's not attendance, I do some attendance in other classes. So, 1787, what's the big news in 1787? It's the Constitutional Convention. So we're meeting in Philadelphia. And it turns out it takes us a couple of weeks after the convention is supposed to get started because there's not enough delegates to have a quorum of the states represented for the convention. Finally, late May, enough show up and they start to meet, and immediately Edmund Randolph from Virginia presents the Virginia Plan. But this time, we pretty well know that Articles of Confederation just aren't cutting it. And so we're looking for a major overhaul, maybe what we ended up doing, throwing it out and starting again. The Virginia Plan is really pretty comprehensive. And if you look at it compared to the Constitution we ended up with, there's a lot that comes straight from the Virginia Plan. The big states loved it. Small states, not so much. The big change was proportional representation. So the more population you have, the more power your state has in the federal government. After this was presented, it was kind of like, wow, we're not all on the same page yet, but this is great. This is pretty close. There's almost a sense of euphoria, like we might not be here for more than a couple more weeks. We could tie a bow on this and be done. Well, after that, we got the presentation from William Patterson from New Jersey. We said, hold on, big states, we've got some things to say. The small states have some things to say. And so we kind of had that same process again. New Jersey makes a plan. There's this discussion, they have a couple of days of discussion about it. Then North Carolina presented a plan. By this time, the delegation from New York is like, what, this is like way beyond what we're authorized to do. We're out of here. But your favorite delegate from New York stayed behind. What was his name? Alexander Hamilton. Yes, so Hamilton stays behind, and he actually has his own plan. And so he presents his own plan. And then unlike the other three plans that came before, there's kind of vigorous discussion afterwards. Hamilton was pretty well liked by the delegates, and they listened to him very politely, but they weren't gonna go with his plan at all. So much so they didn't even discuss it, just kind of like moved on without talking about it at all. Hamilton's plan was basically, the British got it figured out. We should do it just like they're doing it. Except let's go ahead and elect a president, but we'll elect him for life. That was the main difference. Otherwise the same. And so by this time, it's like, oh man, we're in trouble. Now, by this time now, we've also, of course, we faced head on the question of how are we going to be represented? One vote, one state, or proportional representation. But by this time now, we've also had, we have faced the second kind of major issue the convention is going to deal with. First one is representation. What's the second one? Even if you didn't know, you could probably guess and get this one right. What's the other big issue the convention is going to deal with? Not taxes. Slavery, yeah. And boy, we've got states saying, boy, if you allow slavery to continue, we will not confederate. And we're not going to join whatever you guys are making here. And we have other states who are saying if you get rid of slavery, there's no way that we're gonna become a union or that we'll confederate with you. And so it's kind of now a sense like not only are we not close, it's really we're wondering if we're going to be able to get anything done. And this is when Benjamin Franklin says this: "I have lived, sir, a long time. And the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see that God governs in the affairs of men." He's imploring them to begin each day by seeking the blessings of the Almighty to guide them in their conversations. So again, just kind of how our founders felt about the idea of a providential God, a God who will intervene in the lives of men. All right. So today so the process today is going to be looking at how do we record a macro. We did a little bit of recording last time, but we're going to go into a little bit more detail today. We're going to record a macro, and then we're going to edit that macro to do what we really want it to do. And this is really the common way that we go about doing this. We're going to record ourselves doing something, and then it's be like, well, the recorder didn't do everything just the way we wanted it to, and so we're going to make some modifications. And it might be that we just did something a little bit wrong and we want to edit what we did. Or it might be that the macro recorder just isn't really capable of recording what we want it to do. Or I can't think of another or, one of those two things. We made a mistake, or the macro recorder didn't do it the way we wanted to do it. Okay, but this is going to be normal. Record yourself and then go and make some substantial edits to the macro. Now, suppose that that you've been hired in an internship. In fact, maybe I should tell a little story kind of in this space. By the way, why do companies hire interns? Well, true, they're cheap, but the main reason, it's not because they're cheap, it's because interns will do the work that no human wants to do. I mean, that's the real reason. You know, we don't, and of course they also use it as a way to look at you know, potential hires and so forth. But yeah, it's work that nobody else wants to do. And you know, you're young and you're enthusiastic and you'll do almost anything we tell you to do. And so I was really surprised to have one of my students kind of come back to me after his internship and said, Professor Allen, I want to tell you about my internship. That wasn't surprising, but the content was surprising. He said, I went to work, you know, for Amazon. Well, that's great. Sounds like a great opportunity. And he was assigned to the digital camera division. Now, of all the companies that you would expect would be really, really good at having software that goes out and looks at other offerings of competitors on the web to find out exactly, you know, what other competitors are offering and trying to make sure the price is about right and so forth. Amazon, if they're not the best in the world at this, they're in the top 3, right? This is what they do. You know, they don't have humans checking on prices to see what their competitors are offering. They have programs that do that. Well, that's what I thought. And that's true in most cases, but there's something really different about the high-end digital camera market. Does anyone know what it is? Anyone familiar with this? Pricing, competition in this space is really different than competition is in almost every other online market. And the reason is because the manufacturers, Nikon, Canon, Minolta, who are the other big camera manufacturers, I don't know, Sony, they say, listen, we'd love to have you sell our camera, but if you agree to sell our camera, you may not sell it below this price. Right? We are going to charge you a certain amount for the camera, and you can sell it as much as you want, but you can't sell it below price. They're saying we don't want razor thin margins competing on these cameras. We want the margins to be higher. I'm not sure why that is, but that's the way the market is. So if you're in an environment, you're not allowed, you're in an online competitive environment, you're not allowed to drive the price down. How are you going to compete? You can't, you are contractually obligated to not compete on price. How are you going to compete? A little louder. Any thoughts? Okay, so you might do marketing, some kind of come buy your camera from us for whatever reason. Okay, that's not the main way that at least Amazon was doing it. Yep, that's exactly what it is. It's bundling. So they say we can't sell the camera for any less than this, but we can throw in whatever we want for that price. Okay, and so will you buy a camera from us? We'll give you extra memory cards. We'll give you a tripod. We'll give you a flash. All kinds of things we can bundle with it. Now, this is not the normal way that Amazon's expecting to go and get information. And so the digital camera division said, we got to make sure that we're kind of in line with our competitors here. They hired an intern to go every day and go kind of look at what the competitors are offering and say, yeah, we're in line. We're in line. Yeah, we're in line. Kind of an absolutely mind-numbing thing, but that's why they hired an intern to do it, right? And it happened that it was one of my students. Anyway, he came back and he told me this, and I was just astounded. He said, yeah, they actually talked to like the internal IT department at Amazon to have them, automate this. And they said, well, yeah, we can do that. It's going to cost you $100,000 for us to do that. And it's going to take us a year to kind of get it going. And so they said, well, forget that. We're going to hire an intern, way less expensive, and we can have him next week. And so that was his job. He said he started his job on Wednesday, and by Friday, he was on the verge of ready to quit just because it was so mind-numbing. What was it? Click, 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 same as yesterday. Click, 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 same as yesterday. Click, click. Yeah, this was it. So he said, I remembered back to your kind of the very first project that we did, which is what we'll be doing today. And we'll be doing very similar to that. And he said, I bet I could automate this process because it was just, mindless and exactly the same. And so he said, over that weekend, he, put together a project in VBA to do his internship, to just go get that information and check to see what it was. He said he worked, late into the evening on Friday, all day Saturday. He had a little confession to make. He said, I didn't even go to church on Sunday. I worked through on Sunday. I said, don't tell me, tell your bishop. And he said, but by Monday morning, I had it working. Now, when you say you have it working, it's not ready to hand off to Edna from accounting, but it's good enough for him to run it. And if some error comes up, he can work with it well. So, his supervisor came by to check on him, and he kind of sees the screen kind of going crazy, doing all this stuff. And he said, oh, what's going on here? And he said, oh, over the weekend, I wrote a VBA program to, go and collect this information from, our competitors that you were having me do. And of course, supervisors flabbergasted. You did this, what IT was going to charge us $100,000 and do in a year, you did over the weekend. And so he said, well, yeah. So he actually ended up spending the rest of his internship going around to different places in Amazon and automating kind of similar processes for him. I had a great time. They did end up offering him a full-time offer, and he ended up taking it. Although when he told me the story, he hadn't decided if he was going to take it yet. At least I believe he did. One of his fellow students was familiar with it and told me later that he did end up taking it. So today, even at a company like Amazon, it seems amazing that we would have interns doing kind of manual looking up data processes, but it's not unusual. So let's go ahead and set up. I'm starting with a blank workbook. Let's go ahead and kind of set up the problem for today. We're going to suppose that our internship is to go and get some information online for an arbitrary set of stock tickers. And so let me go ahead and just kind of put the ticker here. And we're going to have to get the price earnings ratio. And the earnings per share. We could get all kinds of other stuff. That'll be enough just to kind of get us the feeling. So let's go ahead and get, Apple, AAPL, Google, Microsoft. They don't have to be all technology companies, ExxonMobil, American Express, Ford, GM. But the point is, could be, any arbitrary list of tickers. I'm going to go ahead and name this sheet. Instead of leaving it named sheet 1, I'm going to name it tickers. Now, it turns out that if we come over here to the data tab, we've got this thing right here that says from web. This is relatively new. In 2017, Microsoft replaced the old from web tool to a new from web tool. It was way overdue for being overhauled. And the new one works great. But when we record ourselves using it, the VBA that it generates is a little more complex than we're going to handle here on the first, here in the first couple of weeks of class. It turns out that the older one that is a little bit dated is going to write some really simple VBA code for us. And that's going to be the direction that we're going to use. And so what I want to do is make another tab here. And I'm going to call this one the web query. And we're going to put on what's now called a legacy web query. Now, before we do that, let me just go ahead and kind of bring up like the information that I'm going after. So where would you go if you had to get the earnings per share and the price earnings ratio for a stock ticker? Yeah, go ahead. Finance.yahoo.com. Excellent. I'm going to come here to finance.yahoo.com, and over here, there's like a quote lookup, and I'll go ahead and look up for Apple. And let's see, whoops, I'm gonna zoom in, not out. So if I look here, I can see over here is my price earnings ratio. Here's my earnings per share. And that looks great. That's the information that I'm after here. Now, one of the things that you really should always, you want to be not afraid to do, and that is kind of look at that URL and see if this URL makes any kind of sense to you. I'm going to open this, just put this in Notepad so I can make it a little bit larger for us to look at here. So here's the URL. This looks pretty good. So this is the protocol. Here is the host that we're dealing with. We're kind of looking for the quote. And then they actually have AAPL shows up here in the resource that we're going after. A little bit interesting. By the way, what does the question mark mean? Just show me on a scale of 0 to 5 on your fingers how comfortable you are kind of looking at URLs and kind of understanding what the different parts are. I'm seeing some 3s, 2s, 2, 3s, a couple of 5s out there, some 4s, a 1. Okay, no one with 0. Anyone with 0? So let me just take a look at a couple of things to point out here. This one here, the question mark is really interesting because everything that comes before the question mark is getting us to a resource on a server. Like we're getting like to a script file or to like an HTML file. The question mark says everything that comes after the question mark are parameters. It's like information we're giving to the script to tell it how to behave when it does whatever it does. And so I've got this first parameter. By the way, sets of parameters are separated by the ampersand. And so from the question mark to the first ampersand, that's a parameter. So it's expecting a value named P, and we're telling it's AAPL. I wonder what the P stands for. Can't imagine what the P would actually mean for here, but you can see the AAPL. It's a little interesting to me that AAPL shows up in the, where we're getting to the resource that we're after, and it shows up as a parameter. So then we see this another ampersand, and then what is this one? T, another, it's like a parameter and a value. So TSRC search, I think that's probably something search equals fin search. What do you think this is? What information do you think this might be conveying to the script that's running over there at finance.yahoo.com? Go ahead. Maybe it's where it came from. Maybe it's telling us where the source is. Maybe that's source. SEARCH. It could be search. It could be source. But maybe this is just telling us that. So, but the thing you should never be afraid to play with is to say, you know what? I wonder, does it even really need this? The very fact that it has Apple here and Apple here makes me think it doesn't need this one either. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to get rid of that. And I'm going to plug that in by itself and see if it takes me back to the same place. If it does, it's going to make my life a little bit easier just because that URL is going to be simple. And is this still Apple? Yeah, still Apple. But it's got my price earnings ratio, EPS. Quite often, those parameters, if you don't send the parameter, that script says, well, if the parameter didn't come, I'm going to use a default value. And so it's going to be okay. So that's just going to be a little simpler URL. I remember when I was first doing stuff like this in the late 90s, I was a doctoral student. And at the time at the University of Minnesota, the internet for us wasn't all that reliable. So, be a couple of times a day when the internet would just be like, yeah, we're not answering anything you ask for. And I would do stuff like this. Like, I'm wondering what would happen if I changed the URL to be something that the website never generated. I'm just going to kind of send it back and see what happens. I'd do something like that, and the internet would like go down on the whole university. And I would think, did I do that? Oh no, did I do that? You cannot break the internet by fiddling with a URL, in case you're wondering. Okay, so something you should always feel comfortable with doing to see how it behaves. Okay, so ultimately that's where I'm going to go. Now, if I were doing this by hand, it would be like, come over here, search for that ticker, copy this, go back, over here to my table, and then paste the earnings per share or paste the PE ratio, get the earnings per share, copy this, go to the next page, and that would just be it, right? Tell me what are the big problems with having a human do this? There's some small problems and some big problems. Go ahead. Okay, what you said was the small problem is like copying the wrong area. And that's, no. That's the big problem. Yeah, the big problem is that you're gonna make a mistake doing this. Why are you gonna make a mistake? We're highly trained data professionals, but why are you gonna make a mistake? Yep. Oh man, this is mindless stuff. Where's your mind gonna be? It's gonna be somewhere else, anywhere else, really, anywhere else. What's that? 5 o'clock. You're going to wondering how far is it to 5 o'clock? Yeah. Maybe you'll say it's 5 o'clock somewhere. I don't know. Okay. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be slow, but that's not the big deal. The big deal is you're going to get bad data by doing this. Okay. So that's why we want to automate this process. Okay. So now here's the high level what we're going to do. We're going to create a web query on this sheet, and then we're going to record ourselves kind of doing the whole process, copying a stock ticker, coming over here, modifying the web query to look for that stock, seeing what it brings back, copying the results, and putting it back into the proper place over here. I do not want to record myself creating the web query, because if I record myself creating the web query, it will, when I run the macro, it will create a web query. It'll make a new web query each time. And the truth is, I could probably configure it okay to tell it to write over the top of the old one, but it's a little more complex. Instead, let's make a web query by hand, and then we'll record ourselves modifying it, and we'll go from there. Okay, so if you're a Mac user, you do not have the tool that we're about to use. And so let's see, where did I put it? Hopefully you've had a chance to install the legacy web query. And so you'll use that tool, which appears at the far right of the data tab on your ribbon. So let's just go ahead and take a look here. I'm going to ultimately want this to go into A2. So I'm going to start by being here in A2. I've got something else in mind for A1, and we'll do that in a minute. So let's just go with A2 for here. So to get to the legacy web, again, if you're on the Mac, go to the data tab, and you've installed the add-in, it should be all the way here at the right. If you're with me on Windows, you're going to come where it says, tell me what you want to do. There's some kind of search. If you have a newer version of Excel, it might be a little higher in the title bar up here. But I'm going to search for web, and that should come up from Web Legacy. And what this is going to do is it's going to display a little web browser. Have we talked about this tool at all yet in this class? This really seems familiar to me, but I'm not sure why we would have. We didn't do this example, did we? Oh, it's the homework. That's why. That's right. It was the homework. Okay, good. So you've got this done. Error occurred. Yeah, no. All right. Now, instead of trying to go, so it turns out that this web query wizard is a really bad web browser. It does terribly with active content like JavaScript that's kind of running like in the browser. And if we try to point this at finance.yahoo.com, a really modern, highly automated interface, this thing is going to really struggle. So instead, let's go somewhere a lot simpler. In fact, let's just go ahead and go to the course blog, vba-course.blogspot.com. And I'm going to use this URL, just random.org. Random.org is like a website that generates various kinds of random data for you at no charge. This one still may have an error or two, but it won't be kind of an insurmountable problem to overcome. So I'm going to paste in that URL and click go. If you're, I'm going to say no 2 or 3 times on this, and then that page should settle down. If you're having a hard time getting to the blog, just type in there random.org, and I think it'll be okay. You won't end up with exactly the same page I'm on, but that's okay. So now all I want to do is I just want to say import. Back in the day, we might have said, oh no, we're just after this little table of data here, so we could select just a portion of this page. But we're going to be looking at a completely different page ultimately here. This is just to get the web query in place. And so I'm going to go ahead and just say import. That should come up and ask me again where I want to put it, which is still in A2, so I'll say OK. So if you use the Mac users who use, anyone, we have a Mac user that actually used that? Did it work okay? Yeah, it worked. Yeah, so it doesn't actually bring it up. You just plug in the URL and it makes a web query out of the URL. But the thing I want to point out, this is a web query, right? So if I scroll down here to where the actual random data is, if I refresh, then that should bring back a different set of random numbers. It's making a separate request off to that web page and bringing the information back. Okay, so we've created the web query, and now we're ready to start automating. Okay, so now whenever I'm going to automate a process, there's a couple questions I want to ask myself before I start recording. The first one is, when the user starts running this procedure that I'm making, where should the active cell be? And wherever that is, that's where I want to start. That's where I want the active cell to be when I start recording. Now, what we're going to do here is we're not going to record ourselves getting the data for all of these. The whole point is we want to record ourselves doing it once, and then we're going to tell VBA to do it over and over again. So where should the active cell be to start? Anyone want to give me a suggestion? Oh, yeah, A2 is pretty good. I think A2 is pretty good. The truth is, I'd be happy with anything in column A that has data except for A1. You know, basically, you're gonna communicate to me which ticker you want the data for by having that ticker symbol in the selected cell. Okay, so I'll make sure I'm on one of those when I start. Now, the second thing I want to ask before I start recording is, when this macro is done running, when the procedure that I'm automating is done running, where should the active cell leave off? So what do you think if I'm here on A4 when I start, where should the active cell end when I'm done running this procedure that we're building right now? Yes, A5, exactly. And the reason A5 is so good is because that's got me ready to run again. So I can run it, and then it's ready to run again, run it. So yeah, I like it. So I'm going to start here on A4, that's fine. The truth is, any of these will be just fine. And let's start recording. So I'm going to come back to my developer tab, and I'm going to record, click on record macro. We've done this once before, so it's still pretty new to us. Now we'll go ahead and give this one a macro name, a proper macro name. I'm going to call this one get stock data. Oh, how nice. I can put a shortcut key on this. Let's see, this is stock data. So why don't I call that Control S? Wait a minute, Control S sounds familiar. What does Control S do? Not anymore, it doesn't. Now Control S runs this macro. You see what I mean when I said a couple times ago that they don't want, the folks who made this don't want mere mortals having access to this, right? If my mother could record a macro, she'd probably call it Control S. And that's not going to be good for anybody. And so it turns out that every single keystroke is pre-mapped. Like Control S means something, Control P means something, Control W means, that all means something to Excel, except for Control M. Oddly enough, that's the one. Is it because that's the one macro you're going to want to make, M for macro? I don't know, but that's the one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a capital S. There are a few keystrokes, Control plus Shift plus S, that are mapped in Excel. I don't, if Control Shift S is pre-mapped, I don't have any idea what it does, and I've never got the urge to use it. So I'm going to feel pretty comfortable making that be what runs my macro. Now we've got a couple of options about where we can store this. The default is in this workbook, and that's where we're going to do it. But let's look at the other options. This one, you can make a brand new workbook. So you could store this in, some other workbook, which might be nice if you're recording something on a workbook that you don't have access to get the VBA code in. So for example, you're working on someone else's workbook and the VBA code is locked. That's possible. You can say, no, record this in a different workbook. So that would just make a new workbook and put the code in that workbook. But let's understand the personal macro workbook. Now it turns out that to be able to run a macro in a workbook, that macro does not have to be in the workbook. The macro just has to be in any open workbook. So I could record a macro and just kind of keep it in the workbook that I have open all the time. Then whatever other workbook I'm on, I could press Control Shift S and it would just operate on whatever workbook it was. So the personal macro workbook is just a specially named workbook that when Excel opens, if the personal macro workbook has been created, and you create it, by the way, by recording a macro into the personal macro workbook, that would create the personal macro workbook, just a workbook file. But when that workbook has been created, every time Excel opens, it says, let me open up the personal macro workbook. It's like, this is the place that you want to have your stuff. It's always open and available to you. We're never going to record anything. I'm never going to do an example that goes into the personal macro workbook. But if you're recording something, you say, yeah, this is something that I want to always have available. I want to make Control Shift Q do something always. And that's where you would put it in the personal macro workbook. It's just always available. I'm going to leave this as a default, which is in this workbook. And then I will go ahead and put a description, get the PE ratio and EPS from Yahoo Finance. Now, when I go ahead to press OK, right, I'm going to be careful because everything I'm doing is being recorded. All right, I'm already on A4. If I was to click on A3, it would record, go to A3. I don't want to go to A3 because I want it to run on whatever the active cell is. Right where I am, I'm going to press Control C to copy. And I'm just going to kind of bring this up so you can kind of see this as it goes. We can kind of talk about this as it's recording. Okay, so you can see selection.copy. Now you remember we've talked about objects. Objects are things. They have two characteristics that are really important to us. One is called objects have, they have something that it knows how to do. What do we call something that an object knows how to do? A method. And then the other one is they have values that let us know how those things are. We call those values that let us know how the object is. We call that so method is the activity, information about the object is property or an attribute, right? Okay, so which one do you think this is? So the object is whatever is selected. And what do you think it is, a method or a property? Yeah, it's a method. It's saying, hey, whatever is selected, copy it, put it on the Windows clipboard. Okay, so you're going to watch it now as I select web query. You're going to see it, another object and method. So here we've identified a particular worksheet by saying out of the collection of all the sheets we have, there's one named web query that identifies the object, and then the method is to select. We're telling that object to make itself active. All right, now, I would like to get to A1. And I don't want to scroll. If I scroll, it's going to say scroll. I don't want to scroll. So I'm just going to do, what is it? Control home. I think control home is the keystroke that jumps me right back to A1. Yes. Yeah, the question is, can you show us how we can see this? And I will. I don't want you to do this while we're working along. We're going to, when we're done, we're going to go and edit it, and I'll go over it then. But this was just so you can see it as we're doing it. Okay, so I've got A1 selected, and now I'm ready to paste. I have a couple of options to paste. I can press Control V to paste, but right now I'm in edit mode, I think. Come back to, I don't want to go back. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and press Control V. I'm not sure I'm still in edit mode. Maybe I did something that changed that. No, I still was. Good. So I pressed Control V, and that pasted there. Now I'm going to select A2. And if you're a Mac user, at this point, I want you to stop. Hit the stop recording button. We're about to stop recording too, but we're going to edit the macro. We're going to edit the query. And again, on Mac, you don't have that web query tool. So now I'm going to right click here on A2, and I'm going to choose edit query. I was trying this on my Mac this afternoon. I was surprised that even the edit query link is here on the Mac. It just doesn't do anything when you click on it. So edit query, it should bring up that same query, same errors. And all I'm doing here is I'm doing this to get the code that it takes to generate the query, to edit the query. I don't really want to change the query here. Remember when I said that everything you do is getting recorded? That's not entirely true. Anytime you get to a dialog box like this web query wizard, it's like the macro recorder says, oh, a dialog box. I can tell you need a little personal time here. I'll avert my eyes. And it doesn't really pay attention to what's going on in the dialog box until you click OK, or in this case, import. And then it looks over the dialog box, how it's configured, and say, that's how we have it configured. So even if I was to paste in something with Microsoft in the URL here, it wouldn't record me pasting that in, so it would be dynamic. It would record it just as a fixed URL. And so I'm not even gonna try to change this. I'm gonna try to make this as simple as possible in terms of editing the web query, and then we'll deal with the code. So now I'll go ahead and click import. And that should put it right back. And this was the code that I was after. Now I'm gonna stop here as well, and we're gonna get things modified to here, and then we'll do some more recording. So I'm gonna stop this one. Okay, so to be able to get to the Visual Basic editor here, there's a couple ways we can do it. Kind of the easiest way to find the one you're looking for is on your developer tab, come to your list of macros. Should be pretty simple. There should be exactly one. So tracking it down shouldn't be hard. And then from here, you can click edit. And that should take me not just to the Visual Basic environment, but it should take me to that particular macro that we recorded. Any questions? We doing okay? Anyone need a hand? Okay. If you're on the Mac, that add-in that you did actually wrote into your immediate window, it wrote the code that you need to edit the web query. So if your immediate window isn't showing, choose View, and then Immediate Window. And so there's going to be a little block of code in there that you can copy out and put right in here. But let's just take a look at what we have here. So copy, select, we opened the web query sheet, we selected A1, we pasted, we selected A2. This one, what did we do that generated this? Application cut copy mode equals false. It was when we opened up the web query wizard to modify that query. Was there a question here? It might have been when we right click. I wasn't really paying that close of attention as to when it went in. But here's the thing, when you press Control C and you copy a cell, things behave a little bit differently in Excel. When you're in cut copy mode, which is where you are when you press Control C, what does the Enter key do? The Enter key pastes when you're in cut copy mode. It behaves differently. And so this is just saying, hey, come out of cut copy mode. The truth is, we could delete this and that would be okay. It would behave just fine. It doesn't hurt to leave it there, but that's a little bit strange because it doesn't correspond that clearly to some activity that we did. Now here with selection.query table, this is saying, all right, remember the whole idea of a with end with is that we've got lots of things that we're going to do with an object. And so after the with has to identify an object. So what object are we identifying? Well, there's something called a query table that's associated with whatever we have selected. And that's right. I mean, if we look at the value here in A2, that home, that actually came from the web query. And so this is a cell that belongs to that web query. And so this is saying with this, the query table from the active cell, the selection, we're going to change all these properties. Now, did we change any of those properties? No, because what the macro recorder did, it said, all right, you made some modifications here. We're just going to record the way that this thing is configured. And here's the important one. This first one here is the connection. So it starts with dot connection. It's saying just in your mind, put this object right in front of that dot. And that will be what you're used to seeing, some object dot property. And then here it's saying what the URL is. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back over to our blog and I'm going to copy the finance.yahoo link and I'm going to paste that in. I'm being very, very careful just to paste where it starts with the HTTP. So inside these quotes, I've got URL semicolon. That's the part that tells this query that it's a web query, it's a URL. And then I'm going to paste that over. I think this may be the first time that we've seen this underscore character. The underscore just allows us to wrap one statement onto multiple lines. And now that URL is not so long, I'm just going to go ahead and bring that back up here onto the same line just to kind of simplify this line. So no underscore included. I'm just saying the connection to the query table is going to be set to this. And if you're a Mac user, you've got a lot fewer lines here, but you should have the connection line. Now, the next time you run this, it is going to then make the request to go to finance.yahoo.com. But which ticker is it going to ask for? Yeah, it's going to ask for Apple every time, unless I do something to make it dynamic. And that's what I want to do. So instead of AAPL, I'm just going to delete that part. And I now want to just concatenate onto the end of this string. I want to glue onto the end of this string the ticker symbol. Well, where is the ticker symbol that I'm interested in? It's not in the active cell because by this time my active cell is A2. And where is the ticker symbol? It's in A1. Yeah, I pasted. I was very careful to make sure I pasted it into A1 so I would know exactly where it is. Well, how do I refer to a range? A1 right here. I can just copy this. This is an identifier for that object. And then after this quote, I'm going to say concatenation, the ampersand symbol, and then I'll paste in range A1. I don't want the dot select method. I want the dot value property. So these double quotes inside of VBA identify what's called a string literal. So think about it. When we're coming along here, Excel, the VBA interpreter has to look at this line. It has to go active sheet. I got to figure out what that is. It goes active sheet, and he goes, oh yeah, I know what that is. That's a method or an object that identifies an object. It sees paste. He goes, I got to figure out what that is. It sees application.cut copy mode. I got to figure out what that is. It sees false. I got to figure out what that is. Well, in this case, this URL, this is not meant for the VBA interpreter to understand. This is made for the web query. The web query object is going to know what to do with this. The VBA interpreter just has to keep track of those characters. And so these two quotes around a collection of characters is our way of telling the VBA interpreter, don't try to figure this out. This is not for you to understand. You just have to keep track of these characters. And so that's referred to as a string literal. It is literally these characters, string literal. But we do want you to figure out what value is in range A1. And by the way, the little range method here that finds a particular object, again, if we have a string literal in here, the VBA interpreter is not trying to figure out A1. The VBA interpreter is just keeping track of A1 to be able to hand it to the range method so that it can find a range object. Okay, so now the connection is going to be https://finance.yahoo.com/quote/quote/quote/ and then whatever the value is in the Show me how you're feeling about this idea, 0 to 5. And 5 is we totally got it, professor. Please move on. Okay, it looks like most of you are at 5, some of you are a little lower, and you'll get comfortable with this for sure. Okay, beginning in 2013, the macro recorder started recording this line. And this line is going to cause an error. I have no idea what they were trying to do when they added this, but it is wrong. And so we got to get rid of it. You could delete it, or you could just comment it out. A single quote character is what makes a comment. So when we have this text up here at the top that we typed in when we started recording, get the PE ratio from yahoo.com, single quote says to the interpreter, don't try to understand that, just it's a note to a human. Don't you understand it? We can do that same thing here. And the rest of these things we're not modifying. We could delete or comment those out as well. I'm going to leave them in place just because I'm trying to modify this as little as possible from what we recorded. And then this one then is going to be important. So again, if you're a Mac user and you copied that code in, you're going to see you've got this line. Refresh background query false. So the refresh is now a method of our query table. Refresh the query table. And we're saying it's not going to be a background query. If we told it to be a background query, it would say, yeah, just run that data, and whenever the data came in, great. But no. We got to wait right here until that data is here because we're going to copy that. This can't be a background query. This has to be a foreground query. This has to be, we're waiting until the results come back. Unfortunately, that's how it records it by default. Okay. Well, this actually should work up to this point. So I'm going to come back to my tickers page. I'm going to put myself on Google, and I'm going to press Control-Shift-S. And that should bring in the data for the Google ticker. You scroll down and see if this looks like it's Google. Do you see anything that lets me know we're looking at Google here? I'm getting some bid ask. That will tell me, but I was hoping to see Alphabet Inc. here somewhere. It's lower. One for me, 126. Oh yeah, so here's Alphabet Inc. But what I'm really interested in here is noticing that I've got, well, here it is, PE ratio and EPS. That's the data that I'm after. Now, for me, it's in row 110. Does anyone have a different row than 110? What do you got? 111, what do you got? Yeah, so it's going to be close right in here. Why are we coming in different cells? Well, it's because this page is dynamically generated, and depending on what content happens to be on, maybe it's a different advertisement that I got than you got that's kind of pushing the data differently. But what that means is I'm not going to be able to just go and record myself coming to cell B10 and copying that data. I'm going to have to do something a little more sophisticated. But I think I'm ready to do that. So let me go ahead and put my active cell back where it was, A2. But I now have kind of gotten myself up to this point, and I'm ready to kind of start recording again. So I'm just going to record another macro. This macro will go right below the macro that I had before, and we're going to ultimately merge these into the same macro. So I'm just going to say record macro. And I'm not, you know what? I don't care what it's called because I'm just after the code that's in it. So I'll leave it as macro 2 and I'll say okay. All right, now, what I'm looking for is probably should have said this before I started recording, but I am, yeah, you guys stay recording, but let me talk. I'm going to stop recording. Let's take a look. How am I going to find this? If I can't go direct, if I can't just jump directly to B110, how am I going to find it? Go ahead. Okay, if I could do some kind of a lookup. Now, VLOOKUP is not going to do it for me. We could say look up in column A for this and have it return a value. Yeah, actually, I think we probably could. We probably could write a formula that would do it. I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm just going to search. Instead of having VLOOKUP do the search, I'm going to do like Control F to do the search. So I will find that PE ratio TTM. And then once I find that, I'm going to tell it, go one cell to the right. Like if I just click it, it's going to record, go to B110. So I'll have to do something a little more sophisticated to tell it to go one cell to the right. We'll cover that when we get there. Okay, so back to A2. You're probably already recording. I'm going to record now, record macro. Okay, so now I'm going to press Control F. And I'm going to look for PE ratio. Was it all caps? No, I don't remember. Space, open parenthesis, TTM, trailing 12 months, close parenthesis. I hope I have that right. What would be really bad is if I just typed in PE ratio and maybe that text actually shows up somewhere else, like in an advertisement. Do you need to get your PE ratio? You know, use our software today. So I'm going to come here to options and I'm going to say, I want you to match case and match the entire contents of the cell. I'm going to reduce the likelihood that I find that text in the wrong place. And then I'll say find next. So anyone know how I have it spelled wrong? It's not all caps. Find next. Okay, so there it found it. Now I may have to, I'm not sure that it recorded what it didn't find. I may have to pay attention to that here in a minute. I'll close my box. All right. You're already familiar in Excel with the notion of an absolute reference versus a relative reference when you're making a formula. There's something similar to that when you're recording. So far, we've been recording with absolute references. In other words, when we click on A1, it says go to A1. In this case, I want a relative recording, don't I? I want to move one cell to the right. Well, look right up here. Below my stop record button, I've got another one here that says use relative references. And so I'm going to click on use relative references, and that will kind of stay highlighted. And now I'll come down, and when I click on this, it will record, go one to the right. Let me see if I can bring my code back up. Watch it happen. Okay, so looks like it's recorded myself doing the adjustment. And now, instead of saying just go straight to B110, it says from the active cell, you're going to offset 0 rows and 1 column. This range A1, how I wish it didn't record that. It's not really talking about A1. And it uses this if it's going to record, if it's going to select multiple cells. It uses a syntax here. Let's ignore that for a second. It really is saying from the active cell, offset 0 rows, 1 column, and select. Now I'm going to copy that. I'm going to come back to my tickers tab, my tickers worksheet. Now, do I want to be on relative references still, or do I want to go back to absolute references? I think I'm still on relative. I want to move one to the right of Google, and I want to paste. Then I'm going to come back to my web query sheet. I could search for EPS trailing 12 months, but I'm pretty confident it's going to be the next one down. So I'm just going to select the next row down, still on relative references. I'll go back to tickers, still on relative references, one to the right, and paste. Did I forget to copy it? Forgot to copy it. I'll make that modification. That'll be okay. Am I done? I want to end up, I want to leave the active cell where I want that to end up. So I'm going to come back and select A4. Again, still on relative references because I want it to come down and over. Now I'll stop recording. All right, I had a couple of missteps here. Let's go ahead and take care of them. So because I did a search that failed first, I can see here's the find method. I was looking for PE ratio in all caps. Here's where I got it right. And so I'm going to go ahead and delete the first one. I don't really need to change the size of my application while I'm running this. So width and height got changed. I'm going to delete those. The rest of this looks pretty good, except I forgot to do my copy after my, just go through this. So I found it, then the active cell I selected, I copied. I went back to the ticker sheet. I selected a different cell. I pasted. I came back. I got my right cell. And right here is where I forgot to copy. I'm going to put selection.copy right there. And I think that will correct it. Now, this was the second half of what I was recording before. So I'm just going to scroll up to where I was recording before. So here's the first one. It gets to this end sub. I just want it to keep going. So I'm going to delete from the end sub through my other macro that I recorded and then quit recording, and then through this one. It's just going to bring the innards of both of these together. So we'll get to that end with. After that happens, we're going to go right to find, and then all the rest of this. So just kind of merge those two together, got rid of the part that said end the sub procedure, got rid of the part that said start the next one, and we're ready to go. I think that's it. I think that's going to do it. So I'm just going to come back over here to my Microsoft, my next one, Control Shift S. And that should bring in the data and then actually bring it onto the sheet. Control Shift S. Oh, it looks like ExxonMobil doesn't have earnings. And that's what we would expect for Exxon. Questions? Yes.
So I'm in the macro, it's not.
Is it recording just actually selecting a sheet? We have a TA here today. Should alert the TAs. It'd be a good day to have them here. I'll come take a look here in just a bit. Yep. Are you using Excel? Just checking. I've never heard of that before. I'll come take a look here in just a second. So kind of stand by and let's see what we can do. That's frightening. Okay, yeah, question here. So like you're in here and you say you want to like delete something. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Control Z.
That works. Why?
Interesting. I would expect it to do it, although I'm not a big user of Control Y. I just don't use it. So I don't know. I'm afraid to do it here, but try the button. Yeah. Okay. Well, I've got kind of a low track record on the question. 3 up, 3 down. I'm struck out. Maybe I should go back to the dugout and let someone else come on. Okay. Well, listen, folks, if all I had to do was get these 7 stock tickers, I'm done. I'm going to press Control Shift S 7 times in the morning and I've got it. But what's the problem if I've got 700 that I've got to get? My pinky's going to get tired from pressing Control Shift S. And so what I'd like to do is I would like to say, now we've got it working for 1, let's tell it to do it over and over again. It turns out that you really can't use VBA to record yourself doing a loop. So that's the programming lingo for what we want to do, to have some code happen over and over again. That's a loop. So we're going to write a new sub procedure just to handle the loop. So I'm going to come all the way to the top. It's going to be a lot shorter. So I'll put it on the top so we can kind of show this code a little bit while we're working. And I'm just going to start typing sub get all stock data. If I hit enter right there, the VBA editor is going to say, oh, you forgot your parentheses. It'll put that opening, closing parentheses. Those are for something. We will see what those are for later in the course. And it put the end sub in for me. That's very nice. But it turns out that I can call this just by saying call. So now, these 2 sub-procedures do exactly the same thing. In fact, one just invokes the other. But I don't want it just to invoke it once. I want it to invoke it over and over and over. And so here's the syntax for a loop. Now we're going to, this is just kind of introductory stuff. We're going to have a day where we talk mainly about all the different kinds of loops. But here's a simple loop in VBA. I'll put in the keyword do. That all do says is, this is the beginning of a loop. At some point, there'll be an instruction that says, go back here. But for right now, it just says this is the beginning of a loop. I can then have any number of statements I want. I only want 1. And then I will say loop. Loop says, go back to the prior do. Now, whenever I have a structure like this where I say, oh, here's the syntax, begins here, ends here, I want everything inside of that to be tabbed in just a little bit, just so I can see the structure. The truth is, when it's only 3 lines, you could get by without doing it. But once you get a little more complex, it's really critical that you've got your code lined up so you can understand it well. So I'll do my best to model that correctly in the class. How long is this going to run? Well, forever is a really long time. It will not run forever. but it will run until something really unexpected happens. It'll run until the network goes down. Because we're trying to request network information. If the network's down, it'll have a failure. It'll stop there. It'll run until there's a power failure. It'll run until there's a nuclear holocaust. It will run until the second coming of Jesus Christ. But we have given it no reason to stop. But it will take something unusual for it to stop. In this case, our get stock data actually moves us down a row every time. That's going to be a problem when 1.04 million iterations later, this thing is going to try to move past the end of the last row on the sheet. It would stop for that. That would be an error. It couldn't do that. But we don't want it to go forever, or until something unexpected happens. When do we want it to stop? Until it finds an empty cell. So let's do this. So I can put a condition to exit this loop either at the top or the bottom. I'm going to do it at the top. I'm going to do until the active cell, in fact, the active cell's value is equal to, and I could put in here something like stop in all capitals, S-T-O-P. Until it bumps into a cell that says stop, it'll run. I don't like that because for all I know, stop is a valid stock ticker. So that would probably not a good idea. So maybe I'll just do stow or better yet, nothing. That's a really strange way to say nothing. Quote, what is it? It's a string literal. It's a collection of characters that has nothing inside of it. And that is exactly what an empty cell is. So an empty cell evaluates to be what we call a null string or a zero length string, a string of characters with no characters in it. You might remember that when we make a string variable in memory, 4 bytes, it takes up memory to have a zero length string because 4 bytes tells us there's no characters here. So there's actually something there. It's stuff that we don't see. So now when this runs, it's going to say do until the active cell's value is blank. So assuming that I'm up here on A1, it's going to evaluate this. Active cell value equals blank. Is that true or false? That's false. And so this is going to do this until this condition is true. We'll call get stock data. It'll come down here, bing, 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 do everything this does. When it's finished with this, it comes right back to where it was called from and moves on. The next one says do, goes back up here. Oh, but by the way, that's going to move our cell down 1. And then we'll call it again, bing, 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 bing. It moves it down, comes back up to the top, it checks. Is the value blank? Or I should say this, active cell's value equals zero length string. True or false? False. So we stay in a loop. Bing, 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 bing. It moves us down, still up to the top, still false. Run it again, bing, 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 bing. It moves us down. Check again, still false. Bing, 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 bing. It moves us down. Check again, it's still false. Bing, 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 bing. It moves us down, back to the top until active cell's value equals zero length string. True or false? True. And so now it says, the condition is true. We're done with the loop. Now, I probably do want to make sure that when I run get all data, it does get it all. In that case, we're going to make sure that we go up to the top to start an A2. So I just copied the line from get stock data that selects A2. And I think I want to make sure that I'm on the ticker sheet. So let me copy the line that says select the ticker sheet. So when I run my get all stock data, I'm going to start off by saying, let's make sure we got the right sheet selected. Then let's make sure we got the right cell selected. And then let's just continue to run get stock data until it's got it all. I think that'll work. And I think also, I really don't want to wait for all of those to go. So I'm going to give myself a blank line here. This should just give me, if I run this, it should give me those first 3. Kind of see that it's pulling in Apple. It's not the fastest thing in the world. Oh, by the end of the class, I'm going to teach you how to use more complex code that can make a request directly to a web server and pull the data back. It'll be a lot faster. Go ahead. Now the question is, how do we speed this up? Get a better internet connection, get a faster computer? And the answer is most of what we're waiting for here is we're waiting for the Yahoo server to send the data back. And so it's not the transition time that the internet connection speed would matter, because it's not sending that much data. And it really, once the data comes here, it's not doing anything complex with it. So it happens very quickly. So it's really how fast that web query is able to pull the information. Question? And it looks like it did bring in that data and then stopped when it got to a blank cell. We could assign another keystroke to this one. But the truth is, I think I'd be a little more interested in like putting a button on this page to run this. Why don't I do that? On my developer tab, I've got this little toolbox here. It's got a little, kind of like a little toolbox with a screwdriver and a wrench next to it. I'm going to select that, and I'm going to choose the very first tool here, a little form control button. Great. I'm going to just click and drag to draw that button onto the sheet. I want to run get all stock data. Say OK. And then I can change this to, maybe just say get data. Once I click off of it, that then will invoke that code. And run that, and it will click that, and it will run that. Okay, I'm going to give you a minute to kind of work on that, and I'm going to come look at some of these questions that we had. Yeah.
So I can start. I was wanting to post that for the videos, so I can just rewatch that part of it.
You can certainly pause it. Yeah.
Or do you post it?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll make sure we review where you get them. Do we have any other kind of questions? Sometimes there's quite a few individual questions, so I'm going to stay after and help anyone who's got a question or issue there. Kind of any other kind of large scale questions about this? Okay, so that's the process. What we're focusing today wasn't on web queries. We're focusing today on record yourself doing something. Don't be afraid to look at the code. Go and look at the code. It's really pretty readable. And feel free to make changes and play with it and make it do what you want it to do. Last question.
You do it like the half screen, edit code while you're recording, or that's great.
Oh, could you edit the code while you're recording it? I've never tried that. I wouldn't do that. I would record it, and when you're done recording, go edit. My guess is you probably could edit it while you're recording, okay, but I've never done it. All right, thanks for coming. Class dismissed. And again, if you have questions, hang around. I'll come take a look.
Scroll up,